Good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to see you. Welcome to the webinar, How to Tackle Burnout with Belbin. We've started a little early to give people time to come in, to make themselves comfortable, to get a cup of tea, and to be able to, sharpen your pencils, have a bit of a breather, talking about burnout, perhaps breathe a little and see how you are. So we're going to start at 2 o'clock and we will hopefully be able to spend 45 minutes to an hour talking about how to tackle burnout with Belbin. My name is Jo Keeler and I'm the Managing Director here at Belbin. We are an employee ownership trust, and this means that we are the team company that we are owned by the team, and we're very proud to call ourselves an EOT. As I said, we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so, first of all, looking at the subject of burnout. And then we'll be looking at Belbin in particular and see how you can tackle burnout using Belbin, understanding the Belbin terminology and also the Belbin reports. So let's get started. At any point, if you wanted just to join in with the comments and say who you are and where you're joining us from, that would be wonderful. Belbin is very much a global tool. And as we found at our conference we held in July, we have people using the Belbin methodology, the reports, the language from places such as Korea, China, America, Estonia, Australia. Virtually every country in the world uses Belbin. So we do have such a global reach. Okay, how to tackle burnout with Belbin. Where do we start? Why did we choose this subject for this latest webinar? Well, we work with teams. We work with teams day in, day out. That's what we do. And we, over the past, I'd say 3 or 4 years, have seen an increase or heard about an increase in this word burnout. And so we thought we'd look at it because it's having a direct impact onto the effectiveness and the efficiency of our teams. I thought it was quite interesting. I'll put this here, is that last week when I was putting together some slides for this webinar, I noticed in the Times that one, they'd use the same image as us. We obviously use the same iStock account. But we're looking here at stressed and undervalued office staff. They've got double the risk of a heart attack. And this is saying that people with stressful jobs who feel undervalued, people who felt they were not paid enough, they weren't praised enough, they were more likely to suffer from stress, more likely to be burnt out. So this is a very topical issue. This, like I said, was last week. You've got the date there, August, in the Times, looking at this phenomena. It's not a new phenomenon at all. Researchers said that actually burnout was very prevalent before COVID. Everybody tends to use this whole change that we had as the start of burnout. Not so. Burnout has been happening for a very long time. What they have found is that it's accelerated during COVID. So what was already there was sped up, and we're now seeing the results of that. But what is burnout? Well, it's actually been defined by the WHO. It's actually been classified as an ICD-11. It's a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed, and is characterized by 3 dimensions: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and reduced professional efficacy. It refers specifically to phenomena in the occupational context. Now, this was quite interesting. There was quite a debate back in 2019 when the WHO decided to have this actually classified. And the debate was around the fact that this is a work-based scenario. This is a work-based issue. Burnout relates to the workplace. It's an organizational problem. Now, the research out there, the data out there, the papers that have been written, there is so much. There's some great work that was published in Harvard Business Review. Those that know me, I'm going to start going like this for papers. I'll put links in the email to all these papers so that you can read them yourselves. And the University of California worked with Deakin University and another organization in the States. And they were saying, why is this happening? And they put it down to things like unsustainable, workload, perceived lack of control, insufficient rewards for effort, the lack of a supportive community. It's interesting. Lack of fairness and a mismatch of values and skills. And it's having an impact. The stats are showing that this is really impacting the way that we work. 63% of people are more likely to take a sick day. They're 2.6 times more likely to be actively looking for a new job if they are suffering from burnout. These stats from Gallup. Tracy, our marketing manager, just ran in just before we started and said, I've just seen something else. Mental Health UK have said that 1 in 5 workers have needed to take a sick day last year due to burnout. The numbers involved here, not just with the people, but also the knock on to our bottom line, the knock on to the effect of our business through not managing burnout is quite substantial. One thing I loved in one of the articles I read is that people are saying it's okay as a company. We tell people to take more time off. It's about, I don't know, gym memberships. It's helping people manage themselves better is what we need to do. And they said no. That is not going to fix it. This is not an individual responsibility. It's an organizational responsibility. The quote that they said is that you need upstream interventions, not downstream tactics. I really like that. I'll repeat it. Needing upstream interventions, not downstream tactics. Now, why has it escalated so much, perhaps, since COVID? What has happened? Why have we allowed to get burnout to the state that it's in? Again, a lot of debate around this area, but we didn't adjust for our workloads. In fact, we added to workloads. We didn't adjust due to the changing environment in which we were working. We didn't give control and flexibility to people. We told them what they're going to be doing whilst increasing their workloads. People felt helpless. And we allowed more meetings and unhealthy screen time. Meetings have always been a problem. Meeting fatigue is not a new thing. It's just that nowadays it's in front of this, isn't it? It's in front of the screen, and that fatigue is adding to that element of burnout. So we need to look at this in more details. The stats and the research show that burnout really is an issue. As always, Gallup have done some great work looking at burnout. They've got some great statistics. They state the top 5 reasons for burnout are as on this slide. Unfair treatment at work. When employees don't just trust their manager or teammates, the psychological bond that makes work meaningful for them has broken. Unfair treatment can include anything from bias, favoritism, mistreatment, unfair compensation, corporate policies. All of this unfairness can help erode that trust that we have, that psychological safety we have in the workplace. Unmanageable workloads. Even the highest performing of employees can find themselves struggling beneath an overwhelming in-tray. And I would say that that's increased when we start working virtually, as we all are. We've got this hybrid, lovely, flexible working that we're encouraging people to have. But it does mean that sometimes our in-trays aren't visible, and therefore they get added to without perhaps as much thought as should be there. So an unmanageable workload. Lack of role clarity is another reason for workload. Only 60% of workers know what is expected of them at work. And the tension between the expectations and reality can be both damaging for the manager and the team member, for the employees. You're almost setting people up to fail. I don't know what it is that I'm meant to be doing. This is what and there's no communication. So people are failing at causing that burnout. And again, that leads in to the fourth reason on that list, which is a lack of communication and support from a manager. People, if they don't feel that they're being supported by their manager, they're people who do feel supported by their managers are 70% less likely to experience burnout. 70%. And unreasonable time pressures. Employees that say they often or always have enough time to do their work, again, are 70% less likely to suffer from burnout. If you give people enough time, that burnout is going to not necessarily not happen, but it's less likely to happen. So there's lots of reasons why burnout happens. It's not a new phenomenon. It's been going on for a very long time. It's been accelerated due to COVID, and the WHO have actually classified it. So it means it is an actual entity. It is a work-based problem, and the research says that we shouldn't be looking at the individual trying to sort themselves out, give themselves more time. Here's a gym membership, here's a yoga retreat, here's whatever. What we need to be doing is looking upstream to see how the organization can help support and have those interventions before the burnout happens. What can we do as organizations? What can we do as leaders? What can we do as managers to help reduce the risk of burnout within our teams, our departments, and our companies? What can we do? Now, Belbin obviously isn't the answer to everything. It'd be lovely if it was, wouldn't it? It's not, but what Belbin can do is help understand how how burnout within people manifests itself, because we are all different. I think sometimes not just burnout, but other elements, just stress in general, think, well, this is how I feel stressed and how I react. Therefore, that must be how everybody else does as well. And yet we know with Belbin, for those of you who aren't familiar with Belbin, Belbin is a behavioral tool. It measures behavior. It doesn't measure personality. And this is a real distinct difference. And that's why the language of Belbin is so useful in these real contexts within organizations. So your personality is who you are. Your behavior is what you do. And there's not always a direct link there, because your behavior is also influenced not just by your personality, but by your values, your motivations, your experiences, your role learning. There's so much which informs our behavior that it's so important that we look at it. It's observable. You can see it. And this is what Belbin measures, not whether or not you're red, green, blue, or yellow, or whatever initials you want to give it, but actually how that combined with the environment manifests itself in what you do. It's a doing word. As I used to say to my children, it's a doing word, it's a verb. Okay, so with Belbin, because it can help there, I think it would be really useful if we just spent a little bit of time seeing how each of those behaviors, those clusters of behaviors, those 9 team roles, how they deal with burnout. How can we see what are the clues that we can have within our team that things are being tipped slightly over the edge? So let's start with a shaper. I don't know how many of you have high shaper in your profiles. I'll put my hand up here. The thing is with us, we want to keep going. We've got lots of energy. We like to challenge. We're quite competitive. We're going to get there. We're achievement orientated. One size we have of burnout is we feel really frustrated. We might push harder than's needed. And that can be a problem because it alienates the rest of the team. So if the person who has high shaper within your team starts pushing a bit more than they normally would, perhaps it's a good time for one-to-one. Of course, we are not just one team role. We're not just one thing. We're a myriad, a beautiful collection of all of these 9 team roles. Obviously, some of them are more prevalent than others. Some of them we have more strengths in than others. So how would you manage somebody with high shaper behavior? Once you're noticing perhaps they're pushing a bit too much, they might be a bit snappy. They don't have that, when they're quite direct anyway, but even more so. Ask them what is frustrating them. Do they feel that things aren't moving as quickly as they like? What are the quick wins they can be involved in? What are the quick wins so that they feel that they're still moving forward, as opposed to that frustration of standing still? Now, the shaper, obviously, you need to manage with all of these. You need to sit down and have a one-to-one with the shaper. It's when you find that that frustration is beginning to show itself in the way that they're pushing and the way that they're reacting. Now, those with completer finisher strengths. Now, this is interesting. The completer finishers actually are the ones that we were really concerned about when it came to COVID. They're the ones with the high anxiety because they want everything to be right. They check, check, and check again. They're perfectionists. And they don't like delegating work because nobody's going to do a good as job as them. So when we see burnout and completer finishers, it manifests its fact that they're less likely to delegate, even though their workload may be increasingly high. Remember, we said that's one of the factors to burnout is there's too much work to do, is they can't delegate. So in fact, that workload is just getting insurmountable. And this means that with they've got time pressure on there as well, is that they may get that feeling they're having to compromise. To get through the work, they're compromising on quality, and there's a real disconnect there for them. What you need to do again is sit down with the manager and ask them about their workload. Make sure that boundaries are clear, because what a completer finisher doesn't like somebody intrudes on their boundary, because they still don't believe anybody's going to do as good a job as them. But make sure that they know other people can help and can support. Make sure communication is really clear, from letting them know deadlines as much in advance as they can be so that they can start planning more, and see if they are prepared to delegate. Get something off their plate. I would say actually with the completer finisher, it's sometimes difficult to see that burnout because they're already working, because they need that anxiety to make sure that they don't make any mistakes and to check, check, and check again. But you will just see the piles of work really mounting up. Implementers. Their behaviours will change, they will struggle because they like things to be in order. They like things to be very systematic. They like things to be very practical. And they will just keep their head down when they're suffering burnout because they can't connect with it. They can't see change. They don't want to see anything different in what's going on. So they will keep their heads down and they will just try and keep adhering to processes, even if they're no longer relevant. So again, within your team, if you see somebody who keeps coming back to the same process, even though you departed from that a while ago, it's a really good indication that that person is feeling burnt out. So again, a one-to-one, ask them what's working well and what processes might be improved better to support them. By just changing everything around them, by pulling the rug under their feet, it's not going to help. So it's involving them. If there is change coming along, it's involving them with that. With all of this, it's very much sitting down on a one-to-one and asking the right questions, not asking the same questions to everybody. And this is the key thing. It's understanding where those differences are within those 9 distinct clusters of behaviour, those 9 team roles. Now, we just looked at the shaper, the completer finisher, and the implementer. These are our action roles. They are all involved in doing because they're driven, they're doing it quickly, doing it to a very high standard, or doing it within a very structured, practical framework. What does burnout look like when we look at the next 3 roles? And here we have team workers. Team workers are the ones with wonderful listening skills. They've got fabulous empathy. They know what's going on. They're the ones who are your eyes and ears within the team. And they get overwhelmed by emotional overload because they care so much. They're always wanting to solve everybody's problems within the team, and often that is at the result of their own well-being. So ask them what they need instead of them always concentrating on what the team needs. What do they need? And sometimes I say, well, actually, it's the team needs, it's not just me. You go, no, actually, at the moment, we just want to concentrate on you. Maybe they need somebody else to be the listening ear. Maybe they just can't deal with everybody's problems right now because they're suffering from that burnout. So make sure you find out not what they think everybody else needs, but concentrate on them. Somebody else take a turn. The coordinator, the conductor, the one who has that lovely overview, the one who is able to recognize and develop talent throughout teams and organizations, the one that knows what the music is meant to sound like, and they bring everybody in accordingly. And they're trying to keep things held together. They're trying really hard to keep things held together when we're in this situation. One of the strengths of the coordinators, they're quite cool and they're quite collected. They're quite calm. And this means that when they're suffering from burnout, they sometimes just walk away. If the team is suffering from burnout, they can't keep everything together. Everything's really difficult to keep things together. And figuratively speaking, obviously, that they almost have a disconnect. And of course, that's where employee engagement suffers. Talk to them. Do you see a theme coming through here? Talk to them on a one-to-one, and ask them about whether or not people are being utilised properly. Tell them that people have got their heads down because they're feeling burnout or because they're stressed, not because they don't want to engage, but because they have too much on. Is there anybody else that we can delegate to? Everybody's trying to cope in their own way. The coordinator always see the big picture. Not everybody does that. Resource investigator. Now, they are the ones who are always looking for new ideas, borrowed, not necessarily their own. They have wonderful contacts, they have great energy, they're great at negotiating, they're always out. You can never find them, they're never where they should be, because they've got loads and loads of different projects on, lots of things going, lots of opportunities. And you can tell when they're suffering from stress and from burnout is because you can hear the crockery breaking all around them because they can't keep things spinning. Something has to give, and they tend to feel very overwhelmed because they can't keep everything going. Again, talk to them on one-to-one and say which important plates do you need to keep spinning and which ones don't you? Give them the matrix, look at the important, look at the urgent, what should be in that quadrant, where do we need to concentrate on? Let the others crash or find somebody else to keep hold of those for a while. You also may want to give them something that they can do to sort of reignite their spark a little bit, to reignite their passion for what they do. Okay, so we've just looked at the coordinator, the team worker, the resource investigator, and they're all social roles. Sometimes you can see their burnout because they tend to be interacting with others. Sometimes it's quite visible. It's quite acute if you're working with them, that you can see when they've got to these situations, these symptoms. So next we have the monitor evaluator. Now, with monitor evaluator, their stress points are looking at time pressures. Why is that? Well, monitor evaluators are the wonderful ones that take the emotion out of the decision-making process. They weigh up all of the available information and they work out the pros and cons. And with that, they make the right decisions. They have difficulties when that time pressure's on. We said there's too much to do and too little time, is that they feel that they can't give sufficient time and consideration to decisions. They don't like being pushed into action. And this can mean that they really do disassociate from the team. Because they don't like to be pushed into action, they prefer not to be pushed at all. And this is difficult due to the fact that without their input, the team can make really bad decisions, can go in the wrong direction. So it's really important to acknowledge these difficulties. Again, having that one-to-one with the monitor evaluator, and seeing how you can reconcile those changing circumstances and taking the right course of action. Ask them what is most engaging in their work. See if some of those elements can be brought in. What you're trying to do is almost reignite their interest. Now, plants. Plants are another great idea generator into the team. So like the resource investigators, they love new ideas, but theirs are unique. They're great problem solvers. Their ideas are coming from themselves. They're not being stolen or borrowed from elsewhere. Somebody with plant tendencies, they tend to retreat into themselves and those new ideas aren't coming out at all. They become quite insular. They may lose that grounding of what the team needs. Um, and because there's that disconnect between any ideas that they do have and what the team needs them to do, is any ideas that do come out, sometimes there's a it's not quite working with the team. Things may be seen as irrelevant or that's not what we were after. And again, what do we need to do? We need to manage this. We need to keep those lines of communication open, ask them what there's working on. It's hard to bring them out of their shell. Say, ask them, to see what the benefit is of their ideas with what the team actually requires. Perhaps they might really, benefit from speaking to the monitor evaluator more regularly, so they can work together on which ideas are good and which ones aren't, rather than being working very, very separately. And last but not least, we have the specialist. Now, their tendencies, especially have a love of learning, they want to take a deep dive into a particular subject area. And they'll just keep diving when they're feeling, really burnt out. Their headphones are on. And they are immersing themselves. They're in their safe place. Again, like with the plant, because they have gone away from the team, there's a tendency that actually their subject, their specialism, their knowledge isn't therefore useful to the team. There's a disconnect. So again, that communication is incredibly important. Express an interest in what they've got an interest in, see how it is relevant within the team. Now, those three roles we've just looked at, the plant, the monitor, evaluator, and the specialist, they're all the thinking roles. And so when burnout happens here, it tends to be that introversion. They're going into themselves. And again, what you may see a symptom of the burnout isn't necessarily anything particularly obvious, not as obvious perhaps as the social roles, but you'll see because each of them will become withdrawn in their own particular way. So like the action roles, they're the ones that will just sort of keep at what they normally do and just keep at it heads down. The social roles are the ones that we need to manage the relationships with others. And here we have the thinking roles, and it's a case of just being very conscious of those people within the team who are withdrawing, and that's one way which they're dealing perhaps with burnout and how you can help them come out there. Okay, so those 9 team roles, those 9 clusters of behaviour that we know, because the research has told us, and 30 plus years of working with teams, we know that each of those 9 behaviours is needed for a team to be successful. Each of those behaviours is very unique, it's a cluster. And therefore, the way in which they display stress, they display burnout are all very different. And it's important for us as managers, organisations, to be able to recognise that, to be able to recognise that people deal with burnout in different ways. So how can we use the theory of Belbin a step further? How can we do that, use the language of Belbin to actually address some of those problems which were the causes of burnout to start with, when we were looking at the lack of role clarity, the unmanageable workload, the lack of communication, the unreasonable time pressures, and the unfair treatment work? How can we use our knowledge of those roles to be able to address some of that? And we need to address it because this is an organizational issue. It is preventable, but we need to go upstream rather than downstream. We need to have good hygiene, organizational hygiene. We need to have better data. We need to ask more questions. We need to be more visible and more proactive so that we're not dealing with burnout. We've already looked at the issues involved, so we're trying to minimize its impact. And remember, it is on us. It isn't on the individuals themselves. Well, one of the first things we can do, one of the first things using Belbin, using the Belbin methodology, using the Belbin reports, one of the first things we can do is start identifying individual strengths. We know that people who play to their strengths at least once a day are 6 times more likely to be engaged in the workplace. Gallup tells us. There's a lot of stats involved in their data. But it's important that we spend time here and we don't just fill in a questionnaire and say, oh, these are my strengths, this is where I am. We need to ensure that they are strengths that they actually have. And this is why behaviour is really useful. So people may say what they think their behavioural strengths are, those 9 team roles, how they feel about each of those. And that's a great start to understand people's strengths. But it's people's strengths according to them. And we know, and webinars and newsletters we've sent out over the last few months really emphasize the fact that only 10 to 15% of us are actually self-aware. So leaving, yes, I know somebody's strengths by what they've told you or what they've filled in can be perhaps not the bigger picture, not the picture that we need to be able to really ensure that we're allocating the right work to the right person, depending on their strengths. So with Belbin, what we do is people fill in the self-perception inventory and they find out where they think they are with each of those 19 roles. And there's lots of norms. You're based against something like 195,000 individuals on an international database to say how you are compared to the rest of the population for each of those 19 roles. But then we say what we need you to do is find your loving critics, the people that you work with, because this is a work-based tool. So people that you work with and have worked with for at least 3 months, they know you well. We want them to give feedback. We want them to feedback and say whether or not they see the same behaviours that you see in yourself. And they have a form that they fill in. It's called an observer assessment. And you need a minimum of 4 people to complete this assessment because, we don't want to be biased against that one person you also have as a good mate, because obviously we all also need a good friend in the workplace if our employee engagements can go up. Anyway, I digress. So we need to get feedback called observer assessments from our loving critics, people who are prepared to tell us the truth because they want us to do well. And so we start getting more of an insight. And the graph on the right-hand side, just one of the many pages from the individual Belbin report that is generated, that looks at the contrast between yourself and your combined observers about what strengths you have. And this is when you can sit down with people and say, did you know you had strengths here? Well, I thought everybody had those. No, they don't. Your team really value your strengths here. So that person can then work out and become an even stronger and be really consciously become even better at that particular role. That feedback from others helps us grow, helps us develop, and makes us better leaders. It makes us better team players. The more aware that we are, so we're not just basing it on self, we're getting that feedback from others is crucial. And then you continue to use this information. And I said before, we're a myriad of all of these roles. Is this page, it's one of the last pages of the individual report. It will give you an insight into the work that you are best suited for based on the combination of your behavioral strengths. Not a combination of your personality, not a combination of colors or abbreviations or whatever, but a combination of your behaviors. What you do. I have strengths here, therefore these are the types of work that I should be doing. And if we can align those strengths with the work that somebody is doing, it means they're going to be more engaged. And it means, hopefully, that level of stress and that level of burnout will be lessened. You start with understanding an individual's strengths, the strengths that other people see, what they're bringing to the team, get them valued. This is my favorite slide. A picture of an elastic band. Because what happens if people aren't playing to their strengths as often as they can? We're constantly stretching that elastic band. And sometimes you then get to undertake work which does play to your strengths, brilliant, it goes back down again. And then you do it and it stretches again. Now you spend too much time in that stretch position and that elastic band starts to get brittle. It starts to wear out. It no longer goes back to where it should start. It doesn't become as useful. And this is what burnout can look like, is that we keep stretching that band and it's stretched for too long and we can't return back to where we are. We're not as useful. Our strengths aren't being used. And this is really typical. I once showed this slide. I did a webinar for the Institute of Leadership. There are a few hundred people on there. And this slide, suddenly, the comments it was phenomenal. With people going, oh my goodness, I've been there. Oh, that's a great. So many people feel this, is that we feel that we're being stretched too much stretched out of our comfort zones. And sometimes, yeah, a bit of stretch is good. We need to try different things. We're not one-trick ponies. But if we're constantly being stressed, that is where problems happen. This is when people are having to take extra sick days. This is when people start looking for a new job. This is when people are burnt out. It's not just about the individual burnout, it's about the team. And it's important to look at the team as a whole. Could it be, and these are 2 pages, just 2 of the pages from our team reports, we put all of that data, and this is what we need data. We put all of that data of individuals together, and we look to see what is the profile of the team, what is the culture of that team, how is that team made up, how are people distributed amongst that team. And again, this can be a real indicator that if you have blanks, gaps within your team, and we know all these 9 team roles are needed, not always at the same time, and it doesn't mean they're 9 different people. We can all play different roles. But if there is always a gap that's always being played by one person and it isn't one of their strengths, we need to be aware of that. I don't know if many of you have read The Wisdom of Teams by Katzenbach and Smith. What they're talking about high performing teams is it becomes self-managing. You don't need a leader. It can become quite autonomous. The team works together so well. That's what we're always trying to get to. It's difficult to get there because it requires a lot of work, and sometimes people haven't got the time to put that in. But that's what we're looking at here, especially with burnout. Can the team manage that? Are there enough warning signs that the team understands, that person is always playing out of their strengths? They're always picking up the slack. We need to, as a team, help that person out. Perhaps somebody else can take that role. These are conversations you have not on a one-to-one, which we've already said as we've gone through each of those 9 team roles. But these are conversations that we have with teams. And this is where we have so many useful conversations. We plot on an A4 sheet everybody's contributions, looking at their Belbin team roles, and we start discussing team role strain. Who fills the gaps? And also the overlaps can cause problems as well. When you've got too many of the same behaviours, people struggle to get their voices heard. And this can cause stress. This can also cause burnout. There's that lack of role clarity, which Gallup said is one of the reasons for burnout. People don't really know what it is that they're doing. And if you have all of the same, because you've got a team that's all full of clones, because you like recruiting the same types of behaviour, that can be a real issue. I don't really know what it is I'm meant to be doing. I don't know what my input is because everybody's making the same input and I'm getting drowned out. So using the team reports along with the individual reports are giving you so much insight into people's strengths and whether or not you are giving them the roles that align with those strengths, whether or not the team as a whole needs to be looked at. It could be that everybody's playing out because nobody's done this before. We've worked with organisations like this. Everybody's been working in a role which actually wasn't suited for them, but was suited towards somebody else. Remember, we've got to get that wonderful mix of functional and team roles within each of the teams that we work with. And Belbin gives you the language to do that. So we're talking about people with the right strengths and the right roles, but are they in the right job to start with? One thing you can go upstream as opposed to managing downstream is when you are looking to recruit within a team, when you are looking to recruit generally, is thinking, what are the behaviours that we need for this role? Very often when we're looking at recruitment, it can be internal or external. What do we look for? What's the first thing you write down? Well, they need a qualification. We need them to have a degree in this. We'd really like them to have an MBA. I can't see any adverts at the moment who don't need an MBA. We need them to have a professional qualification or at least 5 years experience in a similar role. And we need this, that, and people join and this doesn't quite work out. And they think, but you're being, on paper, you're fabulous. And it's because we're not looking at the behaviours that people are bringing into the team, which really, really are critical. Again, we're talking about data. At Belbin, we have this wonderful online platform called Interplace. And once individuals have completed their self-perception inventory, we've got those observer assessments, we can start doing some wonderful stuff with that data. We can start really playing with it. We can put those teams together and we can see where those gaps are. Perhaps we need to be looking for somebody who has a different behavioural contribution to the rest of the team. Maybe we should recruit looking at behaviour as well as those other things. And it's useful because then you can start predicting how that person may fit, not just within the team, but within, one-to-ones with their managers. How are you best going to manage them? Because it's your behaviour at this point, which is really critical. We also have a questionnaire called the Job Requirements Inventory. And you fill the questionnaire in and you find out the profile of a job in terms of the behaviour. So here you can see it's a sales manager job and it's all red and blue and pink, which is shaper and coordinator and resource investigator. No plant, thank you very much, which is the yellow at the bottom. Are people fitting within that? As you can see on the first example, it's not bad. There'd be some, be a potential there. The one on the right there, I'm not sure there is as much as a fit. Look at that high plant. Is that going to be a problem? Do we want somebody who is going to come up with lots of different ways of doing things, who's a great problem solver, but it's going to come up with loads of ideas? Not all of them are going to be any good. Is that going to detract from their drive, their challenge to be able to get somewhere, which is what we really do need? So as part of an existing recruitment process, why not check that the person is going to fit in the job and is going to be allowed to play to their strengths in the first place? Upstream, not downstream. Okay, we've covered quite a lot in the last 40 minutes. Burnout is something that we all need to spend some time thinking about. Not just how do I manage my burnout? I'm not burnout, by the way, I'm absolutely fine. But how do we as an organization put processes, put ways of working into effect so that we are making sure we minimize the potential of burnout within our teams and organizations? We need to spend time because the stats are quite scary. We know that, let me just check here, this Gallup thing, I can't remember all of these stats, obviously. But 44% of people in a Gallup survey of 7,500 full-time employees, 44% said that they sometimes feel burnout. 23% said they either always or very often are suffering from symptoms of burnout. That's 2/3 of the workplace are suffering from burnout at some level. They're more likely to have sick days, they're more likely for looking at more work. And actually, they're just not engaged. And we want engaged employees within the workplace. We need to look at burnout. How do we look at it? Well, there's lots of other ways, of course, that you can address burnout within your organization. But if you're going to be trying to find the data and trying to use your people and putting things in place at the top, at the beginning, rather than doing things at the end, then maybe look at Belbin. Looking at those behavioral differences, how to manage them, how they manifest burnout, because we're all very, very different, how they help us to align the work that we do with the strengths that we have, and we know that we have them because they've been backed up by others. If we can use that data so that the teams can manage burnout and stress internally, they understand what the factors are and how they can ensure that the right people are doing the right things within the team in terms of the objectives that the team has. And maybe if we can start looking at behaviour right at the very beginning, so that the jobs that we are recruiting people for are determined not just with skills and qualifications, but also in behavioural contributions. Perhaps, just maybe perhaps, if we started looking there, we have already got the language and we have got the tools that we can help, because this is an organizational problem. This is a leader's problem. It's not an individual problem. We need to have the skills and the tools to be able to help burnout. Of course, if you'd like to find out more, you know where we are, team@belbin.com. So thank you very much indeed for attending this webinar or for watching the recording, because there's so many of you who are watching the recording. Hopefully you'll find some time to be able to listen. And hopefully this is just being able to raise a few thoughts, a few ideas of how you can tackle burnout using Belbin within your organizations. We will be sending an email with the recording and with links to all of the studies that I have mentioned today. So thank you very much for all of your time. I'm going to give you 15 minutes of your lives back now. So you can just have another cup of tea. Keep your headphones on, pretend you're still listening, okay? And claim back those 15 minutes for yourself. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.